Gabon is one of the least densely inhabited countries in Africa, with a population that is estimated at 1.5 million. It is officially one of the richest countries in Africa thanks to its offshore oil production. But the country's wealth remains concentrated in a small proportion of its citizens. President Omar Bongo, who served as the elected leader for 42 years, was convinced that developing a railroad from Gabon's seacoast to its rugged interior would unlock the country's other resource, its equatorial forest. This railroad had been a treasured vision of President Bongo for most of his career. When he first proposed it, the World Bank outright rejected the plan as economically non-viable. This denial of credit forced Bongo to seek other investors. But without the backing of the World Bank, it was difficult to convince potential investors that the railroad would in fact be a good investment. Eventually, he was forced to go back to his country's traditional source of aid, France. Seeing an opportunity, the French pushed a hard bargain, so they thought at the time, and maintained a controlling share in the ownership of the railroad. Bongo glowingly described his railroad as the most ambitious project on the continent. His boundless enthusiasm was infectious, and despite all the warning flags, he talked the French into funding more than $500 million. Dubbed the Trans-Gabon, Bongo's rail line was supposed to link all the cities of the country and even some states of Central Africa. Its promising purpose was to create easy transport for the precious hardwood of Gabon as it would move from the interior rainforests to the hungry markets worldwide. The first leg of the project started work officially from the seaport city of Owendo on December 30th, 1973, which just happened to also be President Bongo's birthday. Right from the start, cost overruns and unforeseen difficulties plagued the project. Luckily, the 1973 oil crisis had not only sent a huge influx of cash into Gabon, but, more importantly, it rocketed up their creditworthiness and allowed Bongo to feed the voracious appetite of his pet railroad. By 1979, the line had finally reached Njole, a mere 183 kilometers, at a cost of over $1 billion, or twice the original estimate for the entire project. It would be nearly a decade more before the rail lines were complete. The project was physically harrowing and difficult to engineer. The rugged and hauntingly beautiful interior of Gabon was formidable and filled with wildlife. There were flooding rivers to bridge and sinking marshes to cross, enormous canyons to span, and wild forests to penetrate. In all, the construction of the Trans-Gabon required the felling of 8 million trees, the building of 60 bridges, the digging out of one massive tunnel, the employment of over 4,000 workers for 15 years, and the allocation of somewhere on the order of $4 billion. Nevertheless, it was finally complete. President Bongo led the splendid gala celebration at the railroad station in the seaport of Owendo, where it had all begun. Plenty of dignitaries were on hand from Africa and France. There were bands playing and folk dances and parades and, of course, plenty of loud speech-making. The only problem was the World Bank was right. The railroad was a terrible investment and would never be profitable for Gabon. In fact, almost immediately it required a state subsidy of $60 million a year to finance its resource and passenger traffic, with an indication of no end in sight. The Minister of Transportation at the time of the railway's completion was reported to have said, quote, "Forgetting construction costs, there is no possibility of this railway ever making an operating profit." Why? Gabon's only export from its interior, the primary reason that President Bongo had built the railroad in the first place, was hardwood. But the railroad had used up all the nation's prime hardwood building the railroad. So there was virtually no hardwood left to export anymore. Still, the train was fun to ride, and it had a dandy whistle.